get focused more on that retail business, the big supermarket chain that is Coles, and offload that to a Chinese miner, which is a junior miner but represents quite a good investment for them. Premier Coal focuses primarily on metallurgical and energy coal.
And Dan, broader interest coming from the Chinese here in some of these smaller Australian miners, yeah?
Well, isn't it interesting, because I mean, like last year, you and I think most of our chats revolved around the big mega mergers. We saw BHP and Potash. We saw Chinalco also have a tilt at Rio Tinto. Now, they came up against regulatory hurdles, so as a result, we've seen the big miners, both Chinese miners, target the smaller miners. Now, in the last couple of days, we saw Hanlong. They've made a play, and it looks like it's going to be approved for some smaller Australian miners. That includes Bannerman Resources. Now, the reason, the strategy behind why it's so good for these Chinese markets is simply because of their access not only to Australia but also to African mines as well.
Nice one, thanks Dan. Dan Butcher there in Sydney. Well, it's part of CEO Robert Dudley's plans at the moment to really diversify out of oil and actually replicate multi-billion-dollar projects made by World Dutch Shell. This time looking at a bit of news coming out of Indonesia, and I believe we can find out more as we get over to Haslinda Amin.
Okay, Rich, like you said, multi-billion-dollar projects that will generate cash and profits for 2 decades and beyond. That will help fund growth in other areas as well for BP. Now, here's the plan. BP will invest $10 billion in Indonesia in the next decade, in particular in Tangguh. It may quadruple its size. It says there's still a lot more reserves to be discovered. It will also expand into coal-fired methane. Now, Indonesia is the world's second largest exporter of LNG after Qatar. It needs new supply to replace shipments from aging plants. One analyst says the expansion could be attractive to BP as a much-needed source of LNG growth. But even so, there will likely be an obligation to sell some of that LNG on the domestic market at below market rates. Indonesia is competing to satisfy demand for LNG from China as well as India, the world's fastest growing major economies. Chinese gas demand is now roughly equal to Germany. It's expected to surge to match that of the 27 EU nations by 2035. Rish.
Just staying with Indonesia for a moment, is it really time to, as some people would say, pick up the low-hanging fruit?
Yeah. Bottom fish